All right, thank you. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty connecting, but we're trying to get it sorted out. We'll go ahead and get started. So just as way of introduction, some of you folks have been on a board before and some of you have not. And so I know that it can feel kind of weird being up on that side of the dais and having everybody staring at you. They're really nice most of the time. So don't worry too much about that. As you move forward, if there's a question about procedure or those sorts of things, just feel free to stop and ask. We'll help you do that as we go forward. For tonight, the only motions that you're going to have to make are to elect a chair and a vice chair. And that will happen later on in the meeting, and we'll kind of help you through that process. So just know that, and then as we go forward, as we have more formal meetings, more formal decisions to make, we'll give you some information to help guide you as you go through. So don't feel free to stop at any moment to ask a question. It can feel very weird being on that side of the dais and having everybody look at you make decisions and sort of stuff like that. It doesn't have to be super formal. So just feel free to ask questions as we move forward. To get started, you'll see on your agenda a roll call and board member introductions. And so we'll kind of combine those together, and we'll start here on the left. And I just ask that you introduce yourself, your name, a little bit about your background, and kind of, what drove you to want to be on this board. And so we'll start with Jimsy here on the end, and we'll go down the row.
My name is Jimsy Kuborn. I'm the Economic Development Director for the City of Janesville. I've been in economic development for 14 years, working in 3 different states, and excited to be part of this group, part of this team, and it's helpful. Thank you.
James Otterstein, Jimsy's colleague with the County of Rock. I've been in the community for 27 years, so certainly I've worked in a lot of projects with the City of Janesville and other communities, and certainly have worked on this particular project for quite a bit of time as well, so thank you.
Hello, Heidi Deininger with the YWCA Rock County Executive Director. I've been living in Wisconsin since 2001. Married a guy who's lived here his entire life. We reside in Evansville. I work here in Janesville. Nonprofit management for over 30 years, and just appreciate being here to lend my insight. Thank you.
Steve Dean, I live on the south side. I own a south side business, and somebody thought I'd be a good fit.
Mick Gilbertson, born and raised in Janesville and moved away and came back about 40 years ago and have been here since then. I'm an architect by trade and got involved in this committee because the importance of what the GM site and potential development could be to the community in the region.
My name is Nathan Burkhart. I'm the Executive Director of the Janesville Performing Arts Center. I've been doing that for the last about 9.5 years. Grew up in Janesville, and while I went away briefly, I moved back to raise my family here. Proud Janesville resident. I was interested in this because I like solving tough problems and thinking outside the box. And so obviously this is an important site to the history of this community, and that's important.
Craig DeGarmo, born and raised in Janesville, own and operate DeGarmo Plumbing. Also an ex-council member from 2000 to 2008. Part of economic development is part of what I've always enjoyed about being involved in the community, many boards and advisories, and I'm looking forward to it.
I'm Kristen Dvorak-Stone, also born and raised right here in Janesville. I left for college and then was away for a few years. I've been back about 14 years full-time with Dvorak Landscape Supply, which I am a second-generation business owner. The site is literally right in our backyard of where we are here on the south side, so definitely want to see something positive come from that site.
I'm Jeff Winchell, a Southside resident. My dad worked at GM. We lived pretty close by. I still live in the same neighborhood myself. So I worked at Lear Seating as well until the GM plant closed, so I've got a great interest in it.
I'm Lindsay Bidorf. I'm a Southside resident, and all my dad's side of the family is born and raised Janesville residents, and they're still here except for my dad, and all my uncles are retired from GM. so I'm excited to see what can come in my backyard as well, and I have a young child, so I'm hoping for something good to come in for the Help the South Side.
Thank you so much. The board member that's not here this evening is Erin Klipstein, and we're still trying to figure out how to patch her in from wherever she's at this particular time. So my name is Kevin Lehner, by the way. I'm a city manager here. I've been with Janesville for about 2.5 years. I've been doing city management work for 25 years. Starting out in Texas and then in 2 other communities in Wisconsin before I came here. And I am really, really excited about this process. This is a very unique opportunity to participate in a very collective engagement process to help determine the future of a very important piece of property within the city. And it's also the opportunity to solve an interesting problem. And because, as everybody here knows, that site has a legacy with the community. And we would like to see that return to something that everybody can be proud of. And so this is the start of that process. This meeting is really just kind of level set, talk about why we're here, talk about board duties and responsibilities. And then when we get near the end here, we'll talk about going to do a tour of the site, and we'll talk about how we can get over there and take a look at it. And when you get on the site, if you haven't been there for a while, or if you remember what might have, the old plant or whatever, it's a pretty interesting perspective when you kind of get in there and those sorts of things. So we'll just kind of get started here. Wanted to talk a little bit about the site history, just to kind of level set so we're all working from the same playing field. I will go relatively quickly with this, but just to kind of get everybody their heads around what we're talking about here. So in 1918, GM purchased the Sampson Tractor Company, and in 1919, the first tractors rolled off the assembly line. In 1923, that site transitioned to a Chevrolet automobile plant. And during the Great Depression, it expanded and it weathered the economic depression of the time. 1940s, like many plants of its type, it went into military operation and actually produced artillery for World War II. And then in 1945, it was back to automobile production. It was at its height of employment in the 1970s, so the site employed 7,000 people, and obviously at that time was Janesville's largest employer. It's located, the JATCO site is located on Kellogg Avenue, so 544 Kellogg Avenue. And so when we refer to the GM JATCO site, the GM is the site that housed the assembly plant. The JATCO site was a haul-away yard, and the folks that have been around here a long time will remember that. It supported the GM assembly plant, and it functioned as the haul-away yard. And so the reason why it was there is because there's lots of rail that comes into the site, and still does, and it was a logistic hub with all the connections from the assembly plant. Skipped over. So we know that the workforce was reduced to 1,200 employees back in 2008, and in April of 2009, the production line officially closed. There is some significance that we'll talk about later on as we kind of go through this process, but that April 2009 official closure, or the 2015 official closure, which comes next, is significant. And one of the reasons why it's significant is because it was not part of a deal with the federal government that set aside funds for cleanup of sites. So it happened after that deal was made. So that impacts how we deal with that site and what funds are available to help clean it up, to be frank. In 2017, a company known as the Commercial Development Corporation acquired the GM and JATCO sites from GM. And there was some level of what's known as closure of the JATCO site in 2017. And then, as we all know, in 2018, the demolition of the GM plant began. And there is brownfield contamination on that site. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. We'll show you some maps. We'll talk a little bit about what that means and that sort of thing. And we'll also talk about that in 2020, the DNR issued a closure letter with what's known as with continuing obligations. And so when you work with the Department of Natural Resources, and we have Bill here from AIRS, who's going to talk to you a little bit later on this evening, there are different levels of what's known as closure within the environmental regulations, okay? And what it doesn't mean, closure does not mean that the site is cleaned up, okay? There are different levels of that. So right now on the GM property itself, it is closed, which means that the contamination that is there is capped by something. In the case of the GM plant, the contamination is capped mostly by asphalt and concrete, because that is what exists there right now. And so there is soil contamination in the ground, not uncommon throughout the entire state. There's contamination in a lot of places. There's a lot of contamination in downtowns. There's a lot of contamination in a lot of places, but it is what is known as capped, which is essentially there's an impervious surface over the soil which prevents it from making contact with the general public. And one of the things that we will talk about is that the studies so far that we're aware of, and there's been a lot of study on the site, is that there is not groundwater contamination there, and there is not a vapor contamination issue there. So it's largely the contamination, for the most part, is contained to the soil. And we'll talk about what it is and kind of how we have to deal with that. So as of today, the site is closed, and you can build industrial buildings on the site with continuing obligations. But anytime you do a development on anything like that, you have to work with the DNR to file a plan for how you intend to deal with the contamination, because as soon as you touch a site that is closed, you have to deal with what's ever underneath the ground. And you have to have a plan for it. Those plans could be recapping it somewhere else. It could be moving the soil to a different part of the site and capping it. It could be removal of the soil. So there's a variety of things that you can do, but anytime you touch a site like that, there's a process that you have to go through with the DNR to get your plans approved and to deal with whatever contamination might be there. But we'll talk more about that as we kind of continue. This is just very first high-level sorts of stuff. So we know that vacancy and blight remain at both sites. We had numerous issues during the course of the previous owner's ownership. We had several code violations and millions in unpaid taxes and utility bills over the course of several years. Over the long term, they developed different plans, but there was no cohesive redevelopment strategy by the private firm. So in May 2023, the City Council created what's known as, we'll call it Tax Increment District 42. And the purpose was to eliminate blight. And a tax increment district, we'll talk about some more as we go forward, is a tool that cities can use to fund redevelopment of long-term blighted areas. It can fund redevelopment activities in other areas, but in this particular case, the blight elimination TIF was designed to eliminate blight. And blight has a standard definition, but pretty much you know it if you see it. It is a good definition. And if you look at the GM site, it fits the definition of blight. It has a 27-year lifespan for capturing the tax increment from that site. So that exists today. In February of 2024, the City Council approved what's known as relocation orders. And that is a very formal process captured in the state code that we must go through to acquire sites through the blight statute, okay? And so There are two main sites that we acquired, the GM site, 1000 GM Drive, and the JATCO site, 544 Kellogg Avenue. That makes up the bulk of the parcel. And then there are 4 smaller parcels as well that we went forward to acquire. We own all of them except for one small parcel that we're in the process of acquiring. So we own the entire site except for one small parcel at this time. And you'll kind of see it when you go over there. So we are looking ahead to lay the groundwork for redevelopment, and that's really, really exciting. This is an opportunity because the city now owns the property that we can shape our future, and we relate specifically to the site. We are in the driver's seat. We don't have to rely on any other development company. We can make our own way when it comes to this particular site. You folks are here to help shape that future and to help facilitate community conversations about how that looks as we go forward. Any questions about that part of it before we move on? All right, you guys are quiet. It's all good. So we'll talk a little bit about the purpose of the board. And we'll go into more detail here in a second. So it was established by the City Council on August 25th of 2025, and it provides strategic guidance and oversight, and it's designed to ensure that the future redevelopment of the site is inclusive, informed, visionary, and practical. We want to make sure that you help make sure that what we come up with reflects community priorities while considering the history, the market, and the environment on this parcel. What will you guys do? What will you folks do? You will represent the community and help us ensure that residents' input is heard as we move forward on this journey. Really help us shape the long-term vision of the property, discuss and advise on plans, make a recommendation to the approving bodies. The approving bodies in particular for this are going to be Plan Commission and City Council primarily. There may be some others within the city government, but primarily we'll be looking at making recommendations to the Plan Commission and City Council and really work alongside us to help create a conceptual redevelopment plan. Your goals, and we'll go through a little bit more detail on this, as defined in the resolution: develop a conceptual redevelopment framework, guide environmental remediation and readiness, create a new identity for the site, promote sustainable economic development, engage community and their stakeholders, position the site for long-term success, and foster collaboration and vision-driven oversight. So goal number 1, what does that mean? Redevelopment framework. So when we get down to the end, and this is going to be a long process, that we want to have a visionary, actionable redevelopment plan. And we will help you do that with our consultants, with ourselves, as we move forward. Our primary goal on this site is to integrate jobs, housing, recreation, and mixed-use activities on the site, and priority land uses that create jobs, increase property values and tax base, and foster innovation in open spaces. That's the primary vision for what we're trying to achieve. Environmental remediation. So as we talk about as we move forward, we have to keep the environmental history of the site in mind. And there are certain pragmatic things that we have to deal with when we look at a redevelopment of a site of this type. So what we're looking at is a phase remediation plan tied to what we intend to use it for, addressing soil and groundwater issues and public health issues, looking at how we can incorporate renewable energies and LEED standards for buildings as we move forward, and considering how we integrate, light, sound buffering, traffic, and green space in the confines of this site and how it relates to the properties around it. New identity. We've been calling it the GM JATCO site. GM's not there and JATCO's not there. we need to come up with a better name. And so we're going to work with you to develop a new name and a new vision that signals a fresh chapter for this very, very important piece of property within the city. Through that name, there's a variety of marketing things that are attached to that. We want to make sure that we build recognition locally, regionally, and beyond to be able to have something that we can market to folks when we're all said and done with this process. Sustainable economic development. We are hopeful that we can encourage diverse, high-quality jobs, attract investment in emerging industries, and attract things that align with our economic development strategy. There are some practical things that are happening in the world that we have to react to. The world of manufacturing is changing. The days of having factories with 7,000 jobs is gone. And we know that through automation and those sorts of things. So we have to look at what the market is doing right now and what is practical for what exists here. The way that this property developed back in the 40s is very different the way property develops today. And so we have to take that in consideration as we look at what we're doing as we move forward. Engagement. So we're going to have a lot of public input as we go through this process. We're going to have, obviously, we have open board meetings. So these folks are here because they're very interested in what's going forward. We are going to have additional pop-up events. We're going to have online feedback tools. We're going to do different sorts of workshops and things to solicit public input. And this is where you folks come in, and you're very important. You're a link to folks in the community. And so you can have conversations around the water cooler, at the coffee shop, at other places where you can say, hey, we've got this meeting coming up. We really need to have quality input from our public. Please come and give feedback. Please go to the online tools and use them to provide input to us so that we can make the best decisions that we can make. This is crucially important to the success or failure of this group. And so I just ask you to make a commitment to bringing in as many voices as you can to this process as we move forward. There's also going to be a collaboration factory, a collaboration with other agencies. That includes talking to our school partners, talking to utilities, talking to folks in the private sector about what we can reimagine the site to be. Long-term success. So there are things that, city managers and engineers get really excited about, like stormwater, that we got to consider. How are we going to make the stormwater flow the right way and have the retention ponds in the right place? There are some very pragmatic things that we have to think about. Road design, where the roads are going to go within the site. If there's parks and trails, how they look, how they connect, how they create buffers between uses. There's very pragmatic things like a rail line that we're going to have to consider as we think about what comes next on that site. And so there are things that we're going to want to do to set up the site for long-term success. And so along those lines, we also are going to continually look for funding sources as it relates to remediation, working with good consultants, and doing quality planning. Number 7 is collaboration and oversight. So we really want you to partner with us on what are going to be a very complex strategy. We also have to consider flexibility. This is a long-term process. And so what we start with today might be very different than what we end with, a year and a half from now. We want to make sure that we work with you to respond to different things. Somewhere along the way, we might have something come out of the blue that we have to address and deal with, and we want to be able to work with you to do that as well. We want to keep our redevelopment efforts responsive and resilient as we move forward. So this is a rough timeline. And one thing that what I want to partner with you on is that as you have conversations in the community, please set the expectation that we're going to take as long as it takes. And it's going to take longer than people think to come up with a final conceptual plan that's going to get the feedback that we want and ultimately produce a plan that we all can be proud of. And so Sometimes it feels like we go really slow, and then sometimes it feels it's all at once. Just have been a part of these planning processes before. But as you are out in the community having conversations, let folks know it's going to take a while. This is not an overnight type of sensation. It takes a long time to do it the right way. And it is hard because everybody wants to know what's next, how are things going. So please set the expectation that it takes a while, because we want to do it right, and we want to make sure that we have a plan that we all can be proud of. So conceptually, don't write this in stone, please. We're having our first board meeting right now, September 2025. We hit the first benchmark, that's good. October of 2025, we expect to have an RFP or RFQ for a consulting partner, a planning partner that can help us do the sorts of community engagement that we'd like to do and help us develop conceptual plans as we move forward. November, December, this group will be a part of selecting the right partner for us. And then we're planning in around January to begin public engagement and planning. And then hopefully, if we have everything go according to Hoyle, we'll have a draft plan in mid-2026, and then going in late into 2026, presenting a final plan to City Council. This can change. It's going to be dependent upon what you all want to do, what the community feedback is. If we produce something and strike out, we're going to have to try again, and we're going to have to try to do it until we get it right. So I just ask, for your sake, talk to your family and friends, tell them, once a month at least, you're going to be here at City Hall or somewhere in the community talking about the JATCO site, and I know that you're all very excited to do that. But so just please understand, and we'll do the best we can to work with your schedules as we move forward. So just talking about looking ahead, this is one of our most significant opportunities in decades. We really want to be transparent, inclusive, and visionary. The whole goal here is to attract investment and create lasting benefits to the community, and to transform the site from its historic past to a thriving and sustainable future. So you'll get all my contact information. You have Nick's contact information. He has a direct line to me. The other thing that I want to mention, for those of you that are new to a board, the city is governed by open meetings laws and open records laws, okay? And so what that means to you is that you can't have conversations about decisions that you're going to make here in this boardroom with other members of your board outside of here, okay? And so that's very important to know. The reason for that is they want deliberation in terms of an open meetings law to be in public, to be able to have a deliberation and not have decisions made before you walk into this room, okay? The other piece of that is open records laws. That's a very complex type of law, but folks, when it comes to what you do for this board, have a right to request documents, emails, and those sorts of things from you specifically related to the work you do for this board, okay? So if somebody files an open records request with the city government, and there's documentation, communication that you've had about what you're doing here associated with what your city work, then those records, with some exceptions, are open for public consumption. And there's some things you can redact and things like that, and it goes through our city attorney's office. But I just want to make sure that you understand that open meetings and open records, okay? So just be sure, like what I tell our folks, number one, don't put anything in an email that you wouldn't email to your mother. That's a good rule of thumb. But also understand that the purpose of that is to make sure that we are transparent in what we do, okay? So if we happen to get an open records request, we'll work with you to how you fulfill it. I would suggest that you separate like an email account or something separate for your work here with city government, so that if we do get a request like that we can provide those documents, okay? And if that happens, we'll work through it with you to make sure you understand that, okay? I'm going to turn it over to Bill from AIRS, and he's going to give you a little bit more information about the RFQ process.
everyone. My name is Bill Honey. I'm a geologist and project manager with Ayers Associates. Our firm specializes in brownfield redevelopment, so we're a team of engineers, scientists, and planners. You've probably heard the term brownfield a few times tonight already, and so I just want to go ahead and define that for you. So that's a property where there is perceived or actual contamination or blight, which this meets all those definitions. There's areas of the site where we definitely know there's contamination and blight, and there's other areas where we perceive that there probably is still contamination that hasn't been found. So there's, the next step in this process, as Kevin mentioned, was looking towards a planning consultant. So while we won't be providing any of the planning services because we do have planners on our staff, my role here is as a technical advisor to help guide you through selecting a planning consultant for this project. And we can do some of the legwork for you in preparing the documentation to issue that RFP. So, or RFQ, and we'll get to that at the end as to what that might look like. So, wrong way here. So here's a general site overview. This is the 250-acre property. As Kevin mentioned, it's pretty large. It involves 7 parcels. It's touching, even though the site itself is zoned industrial, it's touching residential areas, commercial areas, the railroad, the regular roads plus commercial. So, the big takeaway is the planning effort at this site doesn't just affect this site. It's affecting the surrounding area. And there's a lot of considerations that need to be wrapped into the RFQ or the RFP process. So what is planning? And the best way that the way that I understand it is essentially it's a roadmap to get the property to where you would like it to be. So it's the vision for the property. Now, that's going to integrate a lot of things. It's going to integrate community needs. It's going to integrate infrastructure. There's going to be buildings. And that will be the planning consultant's job to kind of figure out how all those pieces work together. And they will work with input from you on what that might look like. So it'll be an iterative process. What you see up on the screen here, you also have this in your handouts. So this is an example of a plan that was done for City of West Allis. So this is kind of what you could expect to see, something like that. But there's obviously a lot more to it here than shown on the slide. But these are a lot of the considerations that your consultant will be looking at. As you can see, it extends beyond the limits of the property. So this is, Kevin also mentioned, it's going to be a process. This is generally the process for planning that you'll see most consultants take, where you're establishing a vision, you're assessing the conditions at the site, you start to kind of define what is success, you're looking for opportunities, and then there's going to be a lot of refining of the site plan. So step 5, you're going to see that a lot. There's going to be input, it's going to change. And then once everybody's kind of in agreement, then you start to align stakeholders to back the plan. And then, of course, with any plan, there's going to be some roadblocks that could be zoning or ordinance changes, things that have to be overcome along the way. So environmental considerations. This is where I can provide you with quite a bit of technical input. So Ayers is the city's on-call environmental consultant for this project. And we've done quite a bit of work already looking into the history. Kevin mentioned there's cases that are closed at the site, environmental cases, but that does not mean that it's clean. So what you see in the handout and on the screen now is kind of a summary map of the known contamination that exists at the site. And it's not just contamination that's an obstacle here. You've got acres and acres of concrete and asphalt. And as Kevin said, that's a cap over this right now, but removing that creates its own challenges as well. So that material has to be managed appropriately, and there's a cost associated with getting rid of it. And once it's peeled back, that's the point at which you have to start dealing with this contamination. And there's obviously a process with the DNR to do that. It's called a post-closure modification. So we would have to look at what the planning consultant's recommending, determine whether or not that's feasible given the contamination that's here now. For example, you'll see a small square near the railroad. That's an old sediment repository. So if, working with the planning consultant, obviously that's not going to be a place that we're going to be wanting to put a park, right? That's going to involve relocating contamination either to somewhere else on site or getting rid of it entirely. Now, most of the contamination issues at this site are manageable with the appropriate planning and foresight. So I don't want to say that it's, anywhere there's contamination that's off limits to development. That's certainly not the case. There's methods to deal with that. But it's just important to keep in mind so that as you're going through the planning process and making those decisions, that you're pragmatic about the expectations of what type of land uses may align with different areas of the site. So another consideration is the community characteristics. So they're going to take a look at the existing transit, biking opportunities, nearby parks. They're going to look at the neighborhoods. They're going to try to integrate all of this into a plan so that you have something that kind of flows seamlessly and integrates well with the community. It's meeting the needs. So when you're working with your consultant, expect them to ask a lot of questions, and this is really where the community involvement piece is going to come into play. And also with economic development, so ideally this is going to be a catalytic site where you're going to have an opportunity to work with your consultant to find businesses or other mixed-use scenarios where you could have some economic drive that generates income and tax base. And so that's captured into the TID, and then that helps with development costs overall. Here's a general process for the planning stages. So obviously there's going to be an orientation here now, going through high level vision and goals. So we'll have another discussion about what you guys would like to see out of your planning consultant. And then AIRS will help draft a skeleton document, provide it for input. So essentially we won't be putting the criteria in there for selection. That will be up to you folks, but we will help do the legwork of preparing that document so that it kind of meets the same technical standard that these consultants are used to seeing, so that when they reply to it, it's more standardized form. It makes it easier for you guys to grade and assess them at the end of the process as well. So after that RFP or RFQ is issued, then you'll begin the interview process or selection process. And we would be happy to help advise along with that. And then, after that, you're going to guide the plan to completion. So that's probably going to be the majority of your time spent is working with them on kind of back and forth, land uses, visioning for the site. So yeah, I've mentioned RFP versus RFQ a few times, and the major difference is that when we're looking at an RFQ, we're primarily focused on qualifications. So with your planning consultant, you're going to be looking at whether or not you think that they are qualified to handle this site specifically, versus if we were to issue this document as an RFP, that's more scope and cost based. So you're saying, give me not a plan, but a vision at least, and then tell me kind of how much it costs. So that's a more standardized approach to looking at it, but it also requires more thought in releasing that RFP, because you kind of have to have the broad scope defined and may not be quite at that point yet for what you want to see at the site. Whereas qualifications-based, you're just looking for the most qualified person or firm. So for the JATCO site, I would say that qualifications are critical. And you'd want to look for somebody or a firm that has a successful track record developing brownfield sites just because of the additional complexities involved with the contamination and the sheer size of the property.
There's a quick question, Bill. Bill, one quick question. In the RFQ process, is it still appropriate to ask for what the fees would be? Is there enough information to provide, that the consultant
Absolutely,
will
yeah,
provide that?
it's pretty standard to ask for hourly rates with RFQs instead of a price for the project as a whole. So you could still compare hourly rates.
Okay.
All right, so the next item on your agenda is to elect a board chair and vice chair. Now, I know you all just met each other, but for the purposes, this is for the purposes of running the meeting. The board chair will help us run the meeting, take motions, help guide votes. The vice chair is there for when the chair is unavailable, okay? So just for us to keep things going, if you end up being elected chair and you decide this is not for me, let us know. We'll nominate somebody else and we'll let them run it. So some of you have been on boards before, some of you have been on city council before. But I would ask that for the purposes of this, that somebody nominate an individual to be chair and then somebody nominate, and then there'll be a second. And then if there's any other nominations, we'll take additional nominations and then vote for chair and vice chair, okay? I know this is early in the process, but just for the purposes of running a meeting, for getting agendas out and things like that, we do need to have a chair to run our next meeting as we go forward. It shouldn't be me, it should be somebody from the board. And so again, if you get into that role and you decide you don't want to do it anymore, let us know. You can step down from the chair role. We can nominate somebody else and keep the board rolling. So is there anybody that would like to nominate somebody to be chair?
I'd like to nominate Mick Gilbertson as chair.
Okay, so Craig DeGarmo has nominated Mick Gilbertson to be chair. Is there a second?
I second.
Heidi has second. Are there any other nominations for chair of the JATCO Advisory Board? Okay. All right, so we'll take a vote, but I think we know what the outcome's gonna be. Unless Mick has really
I'm willing
angered a
to
bunch of people, so.
I'm willing to serve as chair.
All right, thank you. So can we have a vote for that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, motion carries. Mick, you are officially the chair. Can we have a nomination for vice chair? Anybody willing to volunteer to be nominated for vice chair? Okay. Lindsay? Okay, Lindsay Bitdorf. So can I get a nomination for the vice chair?
I'll nominate Lindsay Bitdorf as vice chair.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Yes, seconded. All in favor? Oh, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Sorry. All in favor of Lindsay Bitdorf as vice chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, motion carries. I never get to participate in that part of a meeting, so I'm sorry if I stumbled over my words. So, all right, very good. So after this, there is a tour that you can go on. Nick, do you have the van? You ready to rock? Okay. So Nick has, we would suggest that you take your own vehicles over there because then we can leave from the site unless you want to travel. We do have a van that you can travel with Nick in. I think there's roughly 7 or 8 seats in there. But otherwise you can follow Nick. You'll be outside. Once you go right in front on Jackson Street, where we're gonna go is the entrance off of Delavan Drive. So you go to Jackson to Delavan, your first right, there's a gate right on the back side of the gas station. You turn left into that gate. That's what we have keys to. And then you can follow us into the site, and we'll just take you in there and show you around. It's asphalt, it's potholed. One of the things that happened is that the former company took the manhole covers from the site, and we're getting new ones, new concrete poured for it. So there's a few of those that exist, because the lead time on the metal manholes is very, very long. So we're actually pouring some concrete to fill them. So just keep an eye out before you drive into there. So, but I think that it's good for you all to go see it, because you kind of get a different perspective when you get in it, and you can kind of see a little bit more of what we're talking about. Members of the public are happy to join us. This is an open meeting, so you can follow along if you so desire. So.